For me, life so far has just been about finding something that I can succeed at and doing it to the best of my ability. And I think everyone does that. It's not as if there's a big imperative to be the fastest runner in the world or the strongest athlete in the world. If there was, then everyone would be doing that. But there's plenty of people who are good at, music, or who love reading, or who study, or who, become a coxswain and go to the Olympics. My name, Michael Howard Toon, or Toony, as everyone calls me, which takes a while for some people to get. I'm 26 years old. I was born in 1979 in Brisbane in Australia, and I was born with a thing called transposition of the great arteries, or TGA, people refer to that as. And it's only something that I recently began to understand, despite having studied anatomy at university and everything like that. I was born and I was given the all clear by my paediatrician, and I was sent off with all the other babies to the nursery, and it wasn't until later that the nurse looking after me noticed that I'd started turning blue. They call it being cyanotic. I turned like a deep shade of purple apparently, and they whisked me off to a paediatric cardiology hospital in Brisbane called the Prince Charles Hospital. And my mum had her own issues to deal with, having just given birth, so she was left there not really knowing what was wrong with me, and it took them a while to work it out initially anyway. They misdiagnosed me. They assumed the worst, and they told my parents that I probably wasn't going to make it, which was kind of interesting. And my dad accompanied me to the hospital, and it was a little bit later on when I think they sent a chaplain in to baptise me, because he had like the hospital staff access all areas pass. So he went in there, and he came out and actually told my dad that they were doing something. They were doing a procedure on me, and that gave him a great deal of hope, because I thought surely if they're operating, then it's not all doom and gloom. Dad got my diagnosis a little bit later after they'd fixed me temporarily. Went home, and he called up his mates. He was a sailor, so he had a lot of friends in sailing that he'd hang around with and spend a lot of time with. They used to go off on long weekends and competitions all around Australia. And he was chatting to them, trying to, wrap his head around the whole thing. And it was quite funny, because he rang one guy of his and he said, "Oh, you should give that Mark O'Brien guy a call." And Dad just knew him as a sailing buddy who he'd helped out a lot, and they'd spend a lot of time, fixing sails and at regattas together and so forth. And he thought, what on earth is that guy going to know? He knew he was a doctor, but there's a lot of doctors around. And this friend of his said, "Oh, well, Mark's he's like a paediatric heart surgeon. He's like a kid's heart doctor, and he'd be able to give you some idea." So Dad got in touch with this guy, and sure enough, of all the people in 1979 that knew how to fix transposition of the great arteries, this sailing buddy of my dad's could do it. And so he said, "Yeah, sure, make sure he's on my list." So it was kind of funny. Quite amazing, and I still know the doctor to this day. 3 years later, he ended up giving me open heart surgery and fixing my problem with a procedure that's called the stenting procedure, which has since been superseded, which is a whole other kettle of fish. But thankfully, it kept me going, and I was reasonably healthy. We moved to Canberra, and so I got a new cardiologist, and I used to fly back up to Brisbane for appointments. But being so young, you weren't really involved in the decision-making process, and thankfully I was healthy. I had an older brother, 2.5 years older than me, and we'd do just about everything together. We used to go off skiing together. I got involved in sport, and I was relatively ignorant about my condition. I was a little bit smaller than most kids, but I'm bigger than a lot of other kids as well, so it wasn't really anything that I related to my health. It wasn't until I was about 7 years old. I was playing hockey, and I used to do Boy Scouts, and I started getting some bad turns, which ended up being arrhythmias. My heart rate would race. My parents were quite worried about it, and because they didn't have anyone at the hospitals in Canberra that really knew what was going on, it was a pretty tense situation. So I moved back to Brisbane pretty briefly, where they checked out what was wrong with me, and they ended up whacking a pacemaker in me. And I had 2 subsequent operations on the original pacemaker, which they put down in my belly because I was too small to have it in the usual spot in the shoulder. Scar tissue attacked the leads, and I had to have a few other operations, so that was a bit frustrating. I was away from my brother and away from my father, and Mum and I were staying with my grandparents in Brisbane. They eventually got all that sorted, but the upshot of all that was because I was having these palpitations whenever I overexerted myself, my cardiologist sat me down and they said, "You probably shouldn't be doing the team sports. you shouldn't be doing anything where you have to overexert yourself and risk complications. So when my dad was taking my brother down to rowing, he saw there was these little coxers who'd jump in the back of the boat, and their responsibility was to steer and then direct the crew with their voice. And he thought it was something that I could be good at. I didn't really know what you're supposed to do. No one grows up dreaming of being a cox. Everyone turns on the computer, turns on the television rather, and dreams of being their favourite football player or their favourite baseball player or the fastest runner in the world. So it took me a little while to warm to the idea. Dad knew that it would pay off, so he forced me into it. But it didn't take me long to fall in love with it, because when I realised it was something that I could succeed at, the competitive nature of me that had been suppressed for so long, I suppose, came to the fore. And so all through school, it was something I threw myself into, because I got to cox the older guys, because they're always looking for someone small. Traditionally, coxers, so they don't weigh the boat down, are really small guys. They've actually got a weight limit. And so to get the weight down, they'd throw guys from younger ages in with the older guys. So through school it was a real novelty thing, because I'd be able to socialise and compete and get to know some of the older guys in the school. And that was a big boost for my confidence.